Hello everybody, I'm the Introverted Astrologer and I'm delighted to be bringing you my second video on the UK's current political leaders. Now this video is covering a very important person, someone who is shaping up to be the next Prime Minister. The next election must take place by August of 2029 at the latest, and all the polls are placing him well in the leading position. So success is looking almost guaranteed, but almost all of our leaders are heading into some very unexpected disruptions, shocks, turnarounds, and it's quite unusual to find so much mutable placements in the charts of our leading figures. I suspect Farage will have more disruption than most because he has already started entering very tricky territory, and I think he'll have an intense year ahead. So let's go off and look at his chart to unpick it all. Incidentally, I'll just set out that I work as impartially as I can. My own political persuasion is left-leaning. I haven't a clue how I'm going to vote in 2029, apart from to say it will not be Conservative, Labour or Reform. That put aside, I have no problem with predicting success, even if it isn't a party that I support. I had thought that Nigel Farage would be successful in becoming an MP, and I'd said as much, and in that spirit we'll look at his chart now. And so he has an exceptionally charged ascendant descendant axis. He has Pluto rising in Virgo, Uranus is closely nearby, he has Chiron on his descendant axis, and so we've got somebody where there is a dynamic playing out constantly with the need for control and an opposing vulnerability playing out in conflicts with others, with a drive for power underpinned by some emotional vulnerability. And all of this intensity is inseparable from his public role, because the ascendant is our outward projection. If we cast the net a little bit wider and pull in that natal Uranus, it is within 6 degrees of the ascendant, so very powerful, but also in a T-square of its own, with this square to a Venus in Taurus and a Saturn in early Pisces. Venus is representing relationships and possibly money, and this is very likely the part of the T-square that Farage will strongly identify with, that need for stable personal relationships and very likely finances too, because this is in the sign of Taurus. And this Venus is constantly undermined by the opposition between Uranus and Saturn. Uranus and Saturn are not easy bedfellows because of Saturn's urge for structure, for reliability, and Uranus keeps introducing sudden changes. And so there's this innate tension going on between control, disruption, structure, change, and all with a Venus which craves stability because of Taurus. And this is what's very interesting at the moment, because late last summer Uranus transited over this same Venus. Uranus then went on to move into early Gemini, and in this process it has also caught the square with Farage's natal Saturn and is just activating all the natal potential in this T-square. So what would we expect to see when Uranus starts breaking down and disrupting this natal tension? Well, late last summer coincided with the time last year when there were discussions and internal reviews in government about tightening up on political donation rules. There was growing concern about overseas funding of UK political parties, about crypto donations, and the political momentum began building. The media also picked up on this narrative, and we have now just very recently had the announcement of an immediate cap on overseas donations and a ban on cryptocurrency funding, or at least that's the way I understand it. It's been announced that political parties must comply immediately, and I understand that the full legal framework of this is still being formalised. The bill is still going through Parliament. I think it's called the Elections Representation of the People 2026 bill. But I suspect that has a great deal to do with this natal tension which is now being triggered. Will Farage challenge this? Let's unpick it further. Uranus will actually swing by his Venus and his Saturn one more time. So this is still very much being agitated. And I'm aware that many of you know a lot about astrology anyway. So it's probably not escaped your attention that as Uranus moves away from that square with Saturn, it will be edging ever nearer to his midheaven. Let's have a look at the degrees of Uranus. I think later this month, towards the end of the month, it's back in Gemini and moving fairly quickly. And so it will fall just short of 6 degrees by August, September time, which is of course the area of Farage's midheaven. It isn't a precise hit to the very minute, but it is so very close that we are talking highly relevant. And so this whole unfolding Uranus saga is going to reach a very public culmination, because of course the midheaven is our public role, what the world sees. There is no escaping public perception, and the midheaven can also be our public reputation too. And I wonder if we're going to see some sudden shifts in the public narrative around Farage, in his public standing and his visibility. This is a place that is wide open to public scrutiny, and at this point it is certainly drawing in his natal Uranus too. I'm very intrigued about this. Uranus is highly unpredictable. It can go one way or the other, and there's no question that we'll be aware of it. This is big headline material. Now, I believe Farage has a very high degree of intelligence, of versatility, and he has shown great resilience. And this is all playing out across the mutable signs. The mutable signs would adapt under pressure and perhaps try to initially form strategic methods to work through arising problems. They are flexible and responsive. As we move closer to the election, of course, Uranus will also begin to pull in that ascendant axis and the Pluto conjunction to it. And so the level of Uranus disruption for Farage is pretty massive. Can we see anything else in Farage's chart for this year? For example, I can see his moon is now moving through late Pisces. At the time of recording, it was roughly 29.5 degrees of Pisces and has actually just moved out of a square with transiting Uranus. This can be a time when we have a sudden shock or emotional jolt. And of course, the news about political funding is just a few days old. His progressed moon will move further on, and it will move into his 8th house, which we knew was coming. And the 8th house is quite intense, transformative. We could encounter deeply felt crises during the time that the progressed moon is moving through the 8th house, and it is also, of course, the part of the chart which speaks about other people's money. Power dynamics too flavour the 8th house. So confrontations with people trying to dominate or control us are possible. Now, Farage's 8th house is associated with the sign of Aries. Aries is very fiery, very independent, very dynamic, and very strong-willed. Aries responses tend to be on an instinctive level and are very assertive and proactive. So will Farage be inclined to sit back and be passive and compliant about these recent machinations? I doubt it, and by the time we move into the summer through to early autumn, his progressed moon will have conjuncted his Mars too. So this is an intensely energetic, dynamic part of the year for him, and we could see red hot actions around funding power dynamics, shared resources. And there's something else very important to point out about his 8th house, because Saturn is now moving through the sign of Aries too, and it has actually just formed a passing conjunction with Farage's natal Mars. This was exact a few days ago, and Saturn Mars together are introducing a brake on an accelerator, limitations on our desire to assert ourselves and get the things we want. This can be very frustrating. We may also need to suppress a deep inner rage and find that we are restricted or held back from retaliation. One thing that's introducing more pressure is the fact that Saturn will be chasing the moon's tail. There's a great deal of emotional pressure even into the early months of 2027. Need this be a bad thing? We could look at it as a Saturn test. There'll be a feeling of external constraints which keep testing Farage and checking whether he can adapt and consolidate. It does ramp up the pressure, but it needn't be unproductive. Good things could come from it. We do also have to consider Farage's sun in the 8th house, because Saturn will form a lengthier transit with his sun. Now, we've been looking at the various pressures that he's under, and we couldn't overlook this extended period which could be quite tiring. Saturn is bringing in reality checks. It's testing, it's demanding discipline and accountability. It can slow things right down, and we could feel like the weight of the world is on our shoulders. We are in the area of the 8th house, and so issues to do with shared resources, power, hidden things are all going to become much more intense. From a practical point of view, I would say far better to have Saturn transits leading up to a general election, because Saturn strips away the dead wood and it shows us where we might be a bit out of shape. It brings in strong reality checks. So to have this before an election year is probably better, so that we can become realistic about what lays ahead. This sustained pressure from multiple directions is going to make the next year or two very difficult for Farage. It would be a little bit like playing whack-a-mole with one crisis after another to manage. Identity, public life, shared resources and alliances, they're all coming under fire, and everything feels very high stakes. Moreover, our energy could be very low. And so in the short term, I think Farage has his work cut out. I would point out, though, that his progressed midheaven is around 3.5 degrees of Leo at the moment. And so as we move further into 2026, it will form a trine aspect with that Mars in the 8th house. This is bringing in internal courage, impetus, energy, decisive Aryan action, and will help to give Farage the kind of momentum he might need to rally his forces and navigate these changes. His solar return for this year is very interesting, and I didn't want to leave the astrology until I pointed out a few of the more dramatic things in it. The solar return is the central chart, and placed around the outside we have Farage's natal positions. And the striking things I wanted to show you were the fact that this is a solar return with a Virgo ascendant. It's always very important when the solar return has the same ascendant that we have in our natal chart, and you can see Nigel's natal ascendant there. So that's one level of importance. We have repeating themes of what we've recently discussed, because the solar return sun is in the 8th house of intensity, crises, other people's money, and the solar return moon is in the sign of Scorpio. When we find the solar return moon in this kind of situation, we can quickly deduce a couple of things. This is the sign of the moon's fall. Scorpio is very intense. There could be extremes, and control may be very important. The moon is more interested in nurturing, in safety, in feeling at ease, and so this is a difficult solar return placement. You can also see from the aspects it makes that this probably won't be one of Farage's most happy years emotionally. One of the tightest aspects in this return is between this Mercury, which is strongly placed on the descendant, and trine with an exalted Jupiter in Cancer. Mercury is in its fall, strictly speaking, but it doesn't concern me as much as the moon. It is, however, bringing in Nigel's natal Chiron, the part of him which is vulnerable, quite emotional. And when Chiron is involved in an angle in this way, if we look at the various things it symbolises, it can be wounding. It can also be a need to heal or a shame to conquer. There can sometimes be a process of healing through encountering something which is shaming initially and which prompts us to look deeper. Having Jupiter brought in too is suggesting that formal relationships are a strong source of warmth, support, optimism, personal growth. We can also see that this Jupiter is very near the cusp of the 11th house, and if we were using whole sign, it is in the 11th house. So this is implying very strong support and favour from his network, his political alliances, groups and supporters. So this is excellent for spreading his message and for getting backing, but it comes because of this connection with natal sensitivity or vulnerability. This might also be reputational vulnerability because of that 7th house cusp. So he's looking very intense, and I wondered if his numerology would tell us more. Now, his life path number is a 9, and his destiny number is 9-2. 9 can be very humanitarian. There's a focus on ideals, our visions for the world, and we can channel a lot of our energy and drive into larger movements which are for the good of society. 9s are also about completions, culminations, bringing things to a close. Now, Nigel is just about to turn 62, and he is in a personal year number of 8. This is important because the personal year number that we have has the same kind of weight that we might give to the solar return in astrology. It sums up the dynamic of a particular year. And 8 is all about power, authority, finances, status, leadership. It's the sort of number that people will literally change their name in order to try and get some of that 8 energy into their lives. So it's a very powerful number, and it dovetails quite nicely with what we were discussing in astrology regarding the prominence of the 8th house in Nigel's life for the next couple of years. So we have no doubt that this coming year is going to be a strong test of endurance, of leadership, of public presence. He is in his final life path period of 2, which is about collaboration and cooperation. He's also in his final pinnacle of 6, which is placing a great deal of weight on responsibilities, on caring for people around us. So we have this combination of partnerships and alliances being very significant at this point in his life, and the emphasis on leadership, on being responsible for a team around him. But how do we pull all this together to look at it for this year? The current life period is asking for material which isn't readily available in Nigel's key numbers. Where we saw Keir Starmer had possibly even an excess of 2, Nigel has very little. And so cooperating with others, collaborating with them, aiming for harmonious resolutions of things is not coming naturally to him. There are difficulties and tensions in getting on with the people closely around him. He has this natal amplification of 9 energy, which is very idealistic and expansive, but he is going to be in a personal year 8. 8 is much more concrete, controlling, about authority, about power and status. And there is some tension between 8 and his life path and destiny. The essence of the year reinforces the amplification of 9s, and I suspect Nigel is going to go through a process of having to release multiple things simultaneously. The decisions could feel very final and heavy and make for a year which is emotionally and mentally exhausting. By the time Nigel gets to this point next year, I think there will be a little more space for him to step back, to analyse, to strategise, whereas 2026 will be intense. I suspect 2027 will be slightly easier. And as we move closer to the election, Farage enters a personal year 1. There will be that fresh energy, independence, new directions, and a burst of renewed hope. Thank you for watching. Although everything is staying quite stubbornly stable at the moment, we are teetering on the edge of multiple changes, especially from next year onwards. And there are a couple of emerging political figures who are causing some surprise and consternation. So my next video will take a look at Zach Polanski. Of all the candidates, he is probably going to be the least affected by Uranus. And because I've recently completed a diploma in numerology, we'll be able to use the numbers to fill in some of the gaps left by his missing birth time. I hope you're enjoying your long weekend. Take care of yourselves, and God bless you all.